Hello, this is Randy, and welcome back to another edition of Brain Break with Randy and Keitho. I'd like to tell you a story that I hope you'll get a kick out of. I had the opportunity of spending several years in scouting. I believe I'd already been in scouting for 30 some odd years when I was awarded the Silver Beaver, which is the council's highest award you can get. And shortly after that, we moved to a different neighborhood and my talents weren't needed. We had a super scouter already in that neighborhood and ward, so I was asked to be a unit commissioner. I did that gratefully, and then got released to be a missionary and spent about 8 years doing that. At some point, I should tell you those stories. There's some pretty amazing stories. When we first moved to Mesa, I had been the Young Men's President, Explorer Post Advisor, and Priest Quorum Advisor in the El Paso 10th Ward. And we moved into the Mesa 3rd Ward, which is now the Mesa Heritage Park Ward. I was there a couple of weeks when I was called to be the Young Men's President, Priest Quorum Advisor, and Explorer Post Advisor. And they were great kids. They had not had the best experience because there wasn't a lot of training, but the first thing we did was I sat down and asked them what they wanted to do, what they wanted to learn. Same thing I did when I was in El Paso. These guys had a lot different ideas. Of course, the one thing they always wanted to do is just play basketball. I didn't think that was a good use of their time because they could play basketball every day, all day, if they weren't playing video games. Most of them weren't at that point. But one of the things they wanted to do was to have a super activity because their friends in other wards, Explorer Posts had those, and they wanted one too. So we talked about what they could do. The decision was made, since we had a couple of ski boats in the ward, that we would go up to Lake Powell and go water skiing and do some fishing. But we were going to camp on the beach. It sounded like a fun trip. These boys loved to water ski. I had been water skiing with them before. These boys, in fact, all the boys I ever worked with, always wanted me to do whatever we were doing first. So if we were going to go water skiing, I had to be the first one to get in the water and get up on the skis. If we were going rappelling, I was the first one to go down the rocks. These boys are all great athletes. They were a lot of fun. We had made our announcement and done some fundraising for this trip. And we had a man that lived in the area. He owned a home. I didn't know him. I hadn't been in the ward for very long, but he came up one day and he asked me if I was the Young Men's President. I said, yes, I am. He said, I understand you're taking the boys to Lake Powell. I said, I am. So he handed me an envelope. That was a self-addressed envelope, but it was stuffed with cash. Inside was something hard. And I said, what's this? He says, that's to take the boys on their trip. He says, you're going to need extra money. You always do. He says, when I was younger, I couldn't afford to do this, and now I can, so I want to. Okay. I said, what's the credit card for? He says, that's in case you need it. He says, when that's done, that's my summer home. Just mail back what you don't use. As far as the cash, just keep it in the Young Men's organization. Now, I didn't look at to figure out how much cash there was, but it was a couple $1,000. For a guy who worked for money, this is kind of mind-blowing to me. The credit card I was terrified of, but I told the bishop who owned one of the ski boats. He said, oh, that'll be good to have. I said, why? He says, well, so-and-so with the other boat, his boat's got a problem, so we may need to get another boat. And so the boys and I, we all talked about it. What they wanted to do was get ferried back over to fishing. We just used the one boat. But we tried to do that, but where they wanted to camp, and we were going to camp on the beach in tents, and we were taking tables and everything. One boat just wasn't big enough. So I went over, we went back, and I went to see about renting a boat. And I ended up renting a boat. I believe the first one I got was smaller. The bishop's boat was, say, 19 feet. I think I got a 16-foot boat. Well, that wasn't quite big enough. And so we ended up getting a boat that was about 22 or 23 feet. We got everybody and all their equipment in both boats and got over there. And we had just a wonderful trip. We took the boys water skiing. We took them to Hole in the Rock. And we talked about pioneer stories. Some of the boys that liked to fish got to fish. We ate on the beach, which it was a windy week. We didn't need to brush our teeth because there was so much sand in our food that that was taken care of just by eating. But it was a fun trip. I'm positive that none of those boys will ever forget that trip. We had a great time. This gentleman continued to be so generous the whole time that I was Young Men's president. Every year he'd approach me with a handful of cash and a credit card. We didn't always go to the lake, but he was so generous. Unfortunately, he passed one summer. His wife had friends in the area and still owned the house, and she came back down. She asked to meet with me. At this point, I was in the bishopric. She said, explain to me all of the donations we make. Okay. So I said, are you interested in tithing? She said, no, I can take care of tithing. She said, and fast offerings, I think I've got that. She says, but I would like to know, make sure we're paying enough. I was the one our bishop always had get up and talk to the ward about paying a generous fast and an honest tithe. I would do that every quarter the whole time I was in any bishopric. So we went over that, and she felt that she wasn't paying a generous enough fast offering. So she doubled it. It was already the largest in the state. And then she said, talk to me about these scouting donations we make. So I explained Friends of Scouting and what she was doing and all that. She looked at it and said, it's just not enough. We had some very wealthy people that were making very large donations to Friends of Scouting without being asked or saying, how much do I need to pay the most? She just felt like she should pay the most and did. I was very impressed, and I hope my wife will always want to be that generous. She loved her husband dearly, but even though I thought he was one of the most generous men I'd ever met, I just couldn't get over what a generous guy he was. I remember in a ward when I wasn't in scouting and my son was still in scouting, going up and trying to give the scout leader a couple $100 to take with him on a outing. He said, oh, I don't need it. Brother so-and-so took care of me and pulled out $500. I said, well, what did he give you that much for? He said, well, he told me to go buy some candy bars. That's what this guy would do. When he was younger, he couldn't afford to go the time off, or he didn't have the money either. But now that he had the money, he wanted to make sure that the current boys, including one of his grandsons who was in the ward, had a great time. They did. So we had just an amazing trip. It was fun going to Lake Powell and being able to experience all that. And for the boys to see Hole in the Rock and to see how the pioneers had been able to lower their wagons to the bottom of the canyon. And we were able to tell them how much deeper the canyon was at that point. They were just incredulous. They just couldn't believe it. It's a pretty amazing thing. With Lake Powell being as low as it is, in recent years, you can even see more. But if you get a chance, go to Lake Powell. It's amazing. Lake Powell is incredible. It has more coastline than California, Oregon, and Washington combined. It's just an incredible lake. Fishing's not the most amazing, but you can still catch fish up there and have a lot of fun. We certainly enjoyed it. We went to the big arch. I can't remember what it's called. The boys climbed up even where they weren't supposed to. We got in trouble with the rangers. We didn't know they weren't supposed to go up there. And that was one time I was not going with them. But we got them to come down. The rangers shoot them out royally. And they were a little better behaved for the rest of the trip. But we had a great trip. We really did. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this edition of Brain Break with Randy and Keitho. I hope you can be generous. Look out for those around you. I know that as a young scout leader whose time was the only thing I really had to give, I didn't have any extra money because I had 3 kids at home and, other expenses. For these gentlemen to step up, it was wonderful. So be generous and look out for the youth around you. Have a great one. Please like and subscribe. Tell your friends about us. And if you can, leave us a comment too.